So hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna keep talking about BPD. I already published a first part to this video where I introduced myself, talked about my own experience being diagnosed with BPD, and some of what I think are the most useful, most effective coping strategies that I personally have applied on myself since I had little to no access to therapy immediately after I was diagnosed with BPD and even after that. So yeah, I'm gonna keep talking about a few resources that I find to be extremely helpful. And I also wanted to talk about some of the main symptoms that people with BPD struggle with and try to address those specifically. And first of all, I really wanted to thank the people who reached out to me after watching my first video. Some people even started talking to me about their own experience with BPD, and I just found that to be so sweet, and I was really glad that somebody would trust me enough to to really open themselves, and I hope that I was able to help them. I hope that I was able to help others as well. And by all means, if you want to ever reach out to me to ask any question related to BPD or mental health in general, or if really you're just looking for somebody to talk to about this stuff, because I know that it can be hard to find somebody to talk about it, you can reach out to me on my Instagram. My Instagram is martinix. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about is two very great resources that I have encountered in my experience dealing with BPD. The first one is Dr. Daniel Fox. I think that some of you may already be familiar with him. He is a psychiatrist from Texas and he specializes in BPD. He's published a number of best-selling books about BPD, but honestly, I don't want to talk about his books. I am more interested in his YouTube channel because he has a very big YouTube channel where he has hundreds of videos where he talks about BPD, and he talks about every single aspect of it, discussing symptoms, discussing coping strategies, and I find it to be extremely useful, especially compared to just reading a book, because like watching a 15 minutes video is obviously much quicker and much more condensed than just reading an entire book. And personally, I also find a lot of comfort in actually hearing somebody talk to me as if it was actual therapy, instead of just reading something that somebody wrote. It's obviously a much more personal approach, and I think that's one of the main positive aspects of therapy, is that you actually have another person in front of you who's addressing you specifically, and I guess that people just take comfort from, seeing another human being in front of you, even though it's virtual, of course. Especially when the person is, talking about all of these very problematic issues in a very calm tone, in a very, reassuring way. I just find it to be really helpful. And of course, I also find his, suggestions, advice, and coping strategies to be helpful. Although I will say that it can be pretty hard to watch an entire video. Like sometimes, to be honest, I don't even watch the entirety of a video. I will watch up until the point where I feel like I am mentally exhausted enough that I can keep going at the moment, but I will in the future. This happens to me a lot when I do really effective therapy, meaning that I really get mentally exhausted. I feel like when you do really effective therapy, it feels like somebody is, opening the top of your skull and rearranging the insides, and I feel like that's how it's supposed to feel, because, therapy is supposed to readjust those extremely distorted views of reality that you, as somebody who has BPD, who has depression, or who has any other type of disorder, has about the world and about life. So that's how it's supposed to work, but it's also really exhausting. So I think it's completely fine to just take a break sometimes when you really feel like you need it, and to not push yourself beyond your limit. Other times I even rewatch things that I have already watched just because I want to be able to really absorb the meaning of what the doctor is saying, not just listen to it, but actively learn from it. And I feel like that is something that just takes time. So to me, it's also really helpful to re-listen to some of his talks. And yeah, and that's reassuring because you have somebody telling you, this is all normal for your condition. There is a way to fix it. It's not as dramatic as it seems, and all of that. So, I just find that to be really helpful. And of course, it's completely free because it's YouTube, and so you're not spending like $200 a session to see a therapist. So I personally find him to be a really great resource for people with BPD, and I would recommend that you check him out as well. The second doctor that I wanted to talk about is Dr. Alice Miller. I have recently been reading one of her books. She has written a number of books about the way that childhood trauma influences the development of adults and how it has, everlasting effects on the mind and the body of a person. I started reading her work because my cousin, who at some point was also, I think, suffering from depression or some other issues, she told me that she also found therapy to be mostly completely useless. And she said that on the other hand, she started reading the works of Dr. Alice Miller, and she found them to be absolutely enlightening. And so I remember her specifically recommending For Your Own Good, which is about how the effects of violence experienced as a child in the form of so-called discipline can have very detrimental effects on the person as they grow up. The one that I'm reading right now is called The Truth Will Set You Free, and it's more specifically about how trauma experienced during childhood will have a really long-lasting effect on somebody's body and physical health. In this book, she is basically taking a more psychoanalytic approach, going back to what initially caused the trauma that the person is carrying with themselves throughout their lives as adults, and how those symptoms that have developed through time can be addressed. So I like that it's not even limited to BPD in particular, but it's more of a, it's an approach on a broad spectrum of symptoms and mental illnesses. To me particularly, this is really helpful, and although I haven't finished reading it and I haven't read her other books, I'm just really interested in her perspective as an alternative to, more conventional types of therapy, CBT, DBT. I have talked in my previous video about how I am not against therapy, of course, but just a bit skeptical about its effectiveness on BPD particularly. So this, so far, I find extremely useful, and I would definitely recommend that you guys check her out too. And again, I will leave links and info in the description box. Okay, so these are two immediate resources that I wanted to talk about for those of you struggling out there. And now I wanted to move on to talk about some of the major BPD symptoms, how they work, and what we can do to deal with them. The first symptom that I wanted to talk about is the so-called black and white thinking. Okay, if you're familiar with BPD or if you suffer from BPD, you're probably very familiar with this. And what it means is that people with BPD have this distorted vision of reality where they tend to see things in either a very idealized way or in a very negative way. It's also sometimes referred to as splitting, meaning that the process of splitting for a person with BPD is when we go from, let's say, completely idealizing a person, or not even idealizing, but still seeing that person mostly as a positive figure in our life, as somebody who, on the other hand, is either a monster or somebody who has hurt us, and therefore they must be inherently bad, they must be a toxic presence in your life, and you must, just absolutely push them away and not let them hurt you anymore. And as you can guess, this usually happens whenever we feel hurt by this particular person. And the reason behind black and white thinking is that people with BPD do not have the mental capacity, let's say, to understand that people are not just good or bad. And this is something that goes back to childhood and usually to the way that the person with BPD was raised, because many people have argued that, usually the majority of people with BPD come from abusive households. They've had either abusive or distant or neglecting parents, which was the case for me as well, so I'm particularly familiar with this. And so one consequence of that is that if the person's parents were extremely neglecting and were not able to help the child correctly process their emotions, or even just teach them how to deal with their emotions, the child grows up not being able to see people as complex human beings who can have a variety of, traits, and who can do bad things even though they are not bad people. And I feel like for a neurotypical person, this may sound so weird, but it is actually a thing. It is one of the major symptoms of BPD, and sometimes, even when somebody is aware of this, just like I am right now telling you about it, you can still fall into that mental trap of listening to that, BPD voice in your head, not a physical voice, but like a metaphorical voice in your head that tells you that, like, this person hurt you, so they must be bad. And it's like for people with BPD, there is no way in between either loving somebody or hating somebody. It's either one or the other, because it's really hard for a person with BPD to accept the fact that somebody that they love and who they think loves them as well would hurt them. So the way that they address this issue and protect themselves from it is by splitting and convincing themselves that this person is a monster, this person is inherently bad, and I must push them away and get rid of them. Like I said, this can be traced back to the fact that the person was never taught as a child to process their emotions, to to be able to understand people in a correct way. And again, this is extremely true if the child had a very complex relationship with their parents, because of course, as a child we expect a parent to nurture us, to provide us with love and affection. And in the case of children who were raised by abusive parents, their minds cannot reconcile the fact that these people are supposed to be their caretakers and, their parents, so that these people, who are the people who are supposed to provide them with love, could act so cruelly towards them. So that is where this mental mechanism comes from. And again, we refer to this as black and white thinking, and to the process of going from idealizing somebody to absolutely devaluing them as splitting. And again, I just want to stress that I usually refer to these as BPD mental traps, because again, even though you may be rationally aware of why this is happening and of the reasons behind it, just like I am right now, you can still at times fall into the trap of thinking in those terms, even when you realize that, this might actually be splitting, but it's like it's like when you're having those moments, it's like your rational mind is actively fighting against your BPD mind. Meaning that, your rational mind is trying to say something, your BPD mind is trying to say the opposite. And usually if you're under a lot of stress, or if you've been triggered and you're more likely to be controlled by your emotions over your logic, then your BPD mind is usually going to be a lot louder than your rational mind. And so yeah, in those cases, and again, it happens to me as well. um, uh, it, it happens, like, I wouldn't say a lot, but it does happen. Okay, so the next point is the very deeply rooted idea that a lot of BPD people have about the fact that, uh, quote, everyone is out to get them, end quote. What this means is that people with BPD end up, and I hate this word, catastrophizing events and things, meaning that they assume that everything is gonna be for the worst, that they have a lot of issues trusting people because they just naturally assume that this person is gonna hurt me, or they're going to abandon me. And again, like we've said before, this is all the result of trauma. If we were to talk about the origins of all of this, it would take an entirely separate video, so let's just stick to the symptoms for now. So this is a result of what's usually referred to as paranoid thinking. And I find this to be particularly interesting because paranoia by itself can be a symptom of some psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. But in the case of schizophrenia, for example, it's very different from the type of paranoia that people with BPD experience, meaning that usually in schizophrenia you will have very odd beliefs, like the belief that aliens have planted some sort of device into your head. Okay, so BPD paranoia does not go that far, but it still has that element of distorting reality and of that tendency to see everything in very negative terms. And usually, I would say the most common form of paranoid thinking in people with BPD is, again, this idea that everything is gonna go bad, that people around them, especially those that we love, are going to betray us, to abandon us, to hurt us in any way. And of course, if you have BPD, you know that sometimes your therapist or your friends or other people will try to reason with you when you have these very strong beliefs, and to show you that there are actually no signs, no practical signs that any of this is going to happen. Does that make you feel any better? Not usually. Again, this is like you cannot really reason with BPD, or you can after a long, long series of practice. And again, it's one of those BPD traps that your mind falls into. And I just want to stress the fact that in these cases, or whenever you have a setback in your journey to healing from your mental illness, you should not be too hard on yourself. I'm saying this because I tend to be really hard on myself when stuff like this happens, and it's just natural because you may tend to think that you are not working hard enough to get better, that you're not doing things right, or that you're just not strong enough or do not have the skills to deal with this. And again, that all comes from a place of insecurity and self-loathing, which again are very frequently present in people with BPD, but maybe I'll talk about that again in a separate video. It's really easy to blame yourself and to go down that spiral of blaming you for your entire condition almost, for thinking, oh my god, this is happening again, why does this keep happening, why am I not getting any better, I am just hopeless, there is no way that I'm gonna be able to overcome this, and all of that, all that toxic BPD thinking, right? And again, just reasoning will usually not take you out of that moment. Sometimes I find that the best thing to do is to just literally wait for that moment to be gone. I know it sounds weird, but it's a much more powerful strategy than you think, because whenever you're having one of those BPD episodes, as I like to call them, meaning an episode where, let's say, you got triggered and now your emotional mind has taken almost complete control over your rational mind, and you're into this loop of thinking the same things over and over again. Everybody around you is out to hurt you, that so many people have done it in the past, which means that people are just gonna keep doing it in the future, even different people. And you're thinking that you, let's say, hate yourself, that there is no chance that you'll ever get better, and all of that. When you're having those crises, um, there is no magic formula that's just gonna make it go away. And again, even if you actively reason with it and try to analyze things objectively, usually I find that, at least in my case, my emotional mind will still very deeply cloud my judgment. I like to describe this moment as either a clouding of the mind or a sort of tunnel vision, where you're only able to think in those extremely emotional and irrational BPD ways. And there is no way of getting out of that and go back to your real self, to your rational mind, and all of that. So what I usually do whenever I end up in one of these moments is that sometimes I just literally wait for it to pass, because I understand that this has happened before, and no, it did not last forever. It lasted maybe for a few hours, sometimes longer, sometimes less than that. But eventually, I get to the point where I am my normal self, where I regain some, control over my emotions and my paranoid thinking. And so the key is to just not act on those urges and distorted thoughts and impulses, and instead either find a distraction, or honestly, what I do sometimes is even just go to sleep, honestly, and take a nap, because if you've experienced this yourself, then you probably know that this is all pretty heavy on your head. I mean, that sometimes I will literally get headaches from all of these racing thoughts, and BPD itself, and actively struggling and dealing with BPD is something that's really tiring and exhausting for your mind. So again, sometimes I like to just take a nap, and usually when I wake up, I am going to feel a lot better compared to right before I went to sleep. So I know this may sound really stupid, but try it. And physical and mental exhaustion definitely do not make BPD symptoms any better. In my latest video, I shot that one, I think, right the day after I arrived in Italy from Toronto, and I was very deeply jet lagged, and I talked about it, and I said, this definitely doesn't make your mental health any better, but whatever. And it just so happens that I just literally flew back to Toronto a few days ago, so I'm still having jet lag, and again, that's something that's pretty heavy on your mental health if you already have an existing condition. I don't know, maybe some people will think that this is gonna sound really weird, but trust me, try experiencing jet lag when you already have a mental illness, and it definitely doesn't make it any easier. Mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, all the symptoms of jet lag, of finding yourself in a different time zone and with a different weather, like it's all this great shock for your body and for your mind. So I don't know, I don't think there's any research on the on the mental effects of jet lag, but I feel like there should be. So yeah, just wanted to mention that, because again, even if it's not jet lag, mental exhaustion and physical exhaustion can definitely exacerbate somebody's mental condition and mental illness. And of course, taking a break, taking a nap, just regaining some of your energy is definitely going to help. So yes, just take a mental note to not push yourself beyond your limits. Alright, so I hope that this was helpful to some of you. Thank you for watching. Again, I am open to any sort of communication, if you need to talk to somebody, if you have any questions about BPD, you can just reach out to me on my Instagram. Feel free to leave questions in the comment section, or to talk about your own experience if you feel comfortable doing that, talking about your own coping strategies and all of that. And again, I wish you all the best, especially to those of you who are struggling at the moment. Again, I know the struggle very, very well. And as I said in my previous video, trust me, if I have survived this and somehow managed to get better, there's a very good chance that you'll be able to do that as well, because I have been in some pretty dark places. Pretty dark. And, a lot of times I was so sure that I wasn't gonna get out of this, that I wasn't gonna get better, ever. And then somehow I did. Yeah, I'm still shocked to this day. But so, yeah, I guess that was supposed to be a word of encouragement, if that wasn't clear. Again, feel free to talk to me, to talk to other people, to leave comments under this video. And I wish you all the best. Okay.